I'm Mary Ruwart. I'm chair of Liberty International. I have been for about 15 years now. And basically, we're going to be talking today about why libertarians should be concerned about longevity and discuss some of the ramifications thereof. And you might wonder why we're doing this. Well, we're doing this because Liberty International has decided as one of its missions to report on the state of longevity. And we're doing that in many ways. We're having this webinar, and we'll have a similar one in September, date unknown at this point. Also, we are starting a journal. It'll be kind of like the Journal of Libertarian Studies, for those of you who are familiar with that journal. And our first issue is going to be on longevity. And we're going to do an Amazon bestseller type of campaign to make sure that we share these ideas with a lot of people, not just our current libertarian base. And we're going to have some really good authors there. We're going to, I'm going to be reporting on some work with the Life Extension Foundation. Walter Smith will be kind of updating everyone in that journal about where we've been and kind of where we're going. We have Liz Parrish, who is the first genetically modified human. That's what her company does. It makes products, gene products, that help children with genetic diseases. And the idea there is to kind of fund these projects in children by making the technology available to those who want life extension, because some of these are very related. We're going to have some other authors too. I won't go into too much detail, but I will tell you that we're also going to, for our donors, have a November 7th event in the Austin area. Now, if you're not a donor, but you'd like to be one, we'll make arrangements to have that happen so you can come and actually hear some of these people in person. Now, to do that, since we don't have all the details yet, I'm going to encourage you to sign up for our newsletter. And I'm going to tell you step by step how you do that right now. So if you want to, if this excites you, then you can follow me as I take you through this and sign up for our newsletter. So you go to www.liberty-intl.org/contact. And when you get to that page, you scroll to the very bottom and you'll see a box to sign up for the newsletter. And I'm going to repeat that. So you go to www.liberty-intl.org/contact. Scroll to the bottom of the page. And of course, we're going to have a recording of this. So if you're attending, you'll get the recording and you can do it then if you wish. But if you did it now, that's great. If you decide you really don't want to be on our mailing list, you can always remove yourself. So I am going to now turn this over to our moderator, Per Bylund, who's an economist and is going to really grill all the panelists on what they think is going to happen when there's increases in longevity. So Per, please take it away.
Thank you, Mary. So like Mary mentioned, my name is Per Bylund. I'm on the board for Liberty International, and I hope to see you all at our meeting in Nepal, in Kathmandu in August, where we'll have a bunch of interesting speakers and discuss how to bring freedom to the world, as we do every year, bring it and also talk about it. So I'm going to start by introducing the speakers, the remaining speakers. Mary is one, of course, and she should be known to you already. And she didn't mention it, but you should definitely pick up a copy of her Healing Our World, an excellent book that had a profound impact on my own development as a libertarian. I'm not going to tell you when, it was a while ago. But the other speakers that are on our expert panel, so to speak, is first Daniel Fylstra. He's a visionary in life extension and anti-aging technology. And he was a co-founder of Sierra Sciences and a CEO of Frontline Systems, and where he advanced both technology and health innovation. And previously, he founded VisiCore. He is the creator of VisiCalc, the world's most electronic spreadsheet, transforming personal computing. So he has degrees from MIT and Harvard, and he also contributed to the Libertarian movement as vice chair of the Libertarian Party from '98 through 2002. And then we have Jeff Crawford, who is a licensed psychologist for 40 years. He completed a PhD in clinical psychology. He's recently retired, but his career included practicing psychotherapy, executive coaching, and consulting around the psychology of money. Throughout his career, Jeff was an adjunct faculty at various universities. And in addition to his professional practice and teaching, Jeff has been an angel investor, a trustee of multiple trusts, a director on the boards of several nonprofit organizations, and a longtime supporter of libertarian causes. Of course, we're all libertarians in this webinar, which makes a lot of sense as we're talking about why should libertarians care about longevity. But I'm going to start with sort of a question to get us all onto the same page, or make sure that if we are on the same page, not regarding libertarianism, because I'm going to assume that we are all on the same page there, but rather what is the current state of longevity research? What are we actually talking about here in terms of where we are at and where we can expect to be in the near future? Maybe I should probably start with ladies first. Mary, do you have any comments on this?
Yes, well, I probably should have told the audience too that I'm a research scientist by profession. That's where I've spent a lot of time. And I have followed the longevity science for some time, even though that's not my forte. And basically, I think 2027 could be pivotal if the FDA gets out of the way. Because basically there are two laboratories that right now are doing genetic manipulations on age reversal. Age reversal has been demonstrated, at least partial age reversal has been demonstrated in rodents. And now it's been being tested in primates by two laboratories with the intention of going into humans possibly as early as 2027. In fact, I think the original planning was to go in at the end of 2026, and that could still happen. So it's not far away. And we're talking not just longevity, but some partial, shall we say, age reversal is just around the corner. It'll happen probably, if not next year, in the next decade. And so many of us will live to see that and possibly have the opportunity to engage in that. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to live forever, but it does mean that we could have a great extension in health span and lifespan. And by health span, I mean, of course, that we'd be healthy during these extra years, or most of them. So that's what I know, because I am familiar with the work of the two laboratories. But there may be some other things that the other panelists know that I don't. So I'm going to let them speak next.
Okay, Daniel, where do you stand on the state of longevity research?
Okay, so I might be a little bit in opposition to Mary here, but not by much. But so I'm fundamentally an optimist here, but I would, first of all, in reference to, I think Mary's talking about the OSK epigenetic age reversal efforts by several laboratories. And there's some very extremely well-funded, startups working on this and some independent laboratories. One of them is connected with the Life Extension Foundation, and I think we're both familiar with that work. And that's very encouraging. And they are actually doing experiments with primates at this stage. Now, where I would now recommend some caution is that the results of these experiments are sort of like the animals haven't died. Well, what I mean is that the intervention hasn't killed them. Okay. In other words, that ill effects that could be anticipated from this. So this involves introducing there's a number of prizes awarded to Yamanaka for this work about these OSK proteins being introduced into cells and causing them to revert to an epigenetic age expression, to change in gene expression to a much younger phenotype. Okay. Now, what's the ultimate? Now, if you go down to the biology or molecular level, what does that mean? Well, it may mean that all the cells start acting younger and they start doing repair better and so on and so forth. But most of that is still TBD. Now, if you take another step back and say, okay, so when we talk about mouse experiments, so there are I'll just mention, everybody's probably heard this at some stage. You heard it, of course, laboratory mice, which have been extremely well studied, and they're mammals. And although many findings from mice don't apply directly to humans, it's as close as we can get to. And the nice thing is that they only live about 2.5 years. So we can study their lifespans over that short span. That really matters. It's very hard to demonstrate, life extension in a species that lives to 70, 80, 90 years. So we have mice, and then at a more primitive level, we have the Drosophila. These are the fruit flies that have been studied extensively. And at a more primitive level, we have C. elegans, the nematode worms. And there was well-established research that you make these certain genetic, interventions in each of these species, and you see them live longer, which means like plus impressive 20%. They still die. Okay, they die 100% of the time. Okay, all the worms die, all the fruit flies die, and all the mice have died. Now, I will say there is talk in the research community about we should make a project where we attempt to engineer an immortal mouse. So people are at least at a stage of saying, that's not a ridiculous idea. Let's contemplate that possibility. Because we know so much about mice at this stage. There are so many interventions we can make. And there are half a dozen different things that you could introduce in laboratory mice. And again, just to be clear about this, where a laboratory mouse will live anywhere from like 1.5 to 2.5, sometimes up to 3 years. And typically you have to study a collection, a cohort of them. Some of them will die early, some of them will die middle, just like us. Some of them will die at the maximum stage. And then you introduce this intervention, and then some of them will now live 15 or 20% longer. And that's about the state of the art. Now that's encouraging. Although I see Mary nodding, so I think we're not far off in terms of our assessment of the research there. But nobody has yet nobody has a real plan to create an immortal mouse. My own view of the OSK work, or the epigenetic age reversal work, I'm very positive on it. It's the most encouraging thing that might have a dramatic effect, but I can foresee, first of all, there have been experiments where epigenetic age reversal turns into cancer. Something we might talk about at some stage is that cancer and life are very intertwined. We live because our cells grow and divide. We have life only, but cancer cells, their fundamental characteristic is they grow and divide. They just do so in an uncontrolled way. And so anyway, there's a whole set of issues there. So I'm being a little long-winded here, I think, but I just wanted to maybe counterbalance that outlook. Now, I do think that the bottom line here, though, is that first off, that even people who are in their 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, even 80s right now, can do some things and apply some learnings from the current research to gain a little health span. But, like I'm 75, at our age, an extra 5 years is a big deal. And then I would also say that I would be optimistic that children born today who get good health care have a very good chance of making at least to 100. I think that will become the new norm. So that's pretty optimistic. Like right now, the actuarial tables would say a little less than 80, 70 something would be the expected lifespan at birth. I think that will go to 100, and of course, it will mean Social Security will be absurdly, unbalanced. So that's not something else we. So I'd say that much right now. But true immortality and getting to the stage of, like, what does this mean for people's decisions about having children and so on, or the next generation? And then the question of wealth and inheritance. These are all really important questions for libertarians. I think it's going to take a little longer before we face those. The part that scares me a little bit, I think this is worth talking about, is there's a small chance, although I think it's unlikely, the science is such that it's unlikely, that life extension becomes available only to a few. And I would be very, very, very uncomfortable to have, people like Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping extend their lifespans while the rest of us don't. I could lengthen that list, but I think that's. I mean, you may know that those two men were caught accidentally on a microphone talking about life extension for themselves. I happen to think that from everything I know, Mary might have a view on this too. Jeff might also. They're not with it in terms. They're not very well, even with Putin's big program for research. They're nowhere close to that's the state of the art. They're not very realistic. So I'm not too worried about them. Okay, let me stop at this point.
Okay, so some optimism there that we might not live forever, I suppose. I personally like the fact that we don't have any immortal mice yet, because I don't want any of those in my house. That would be pretty terrible. So, Jeff, can you enlighten
Oh,
us of your position?
yes. Thank you, Daniel. That was very helpful. I think I probably have less expertise in this than anyone on the panel. I do make a distinction in my mind, however, between longevity, the work on longevity and increasing that, and I'll be turning 70 this year, so I hope they speed that work up. So between longevity and immortality, I see as two different things, and I'm less optimistic about immortality. But I'm, very encouraged that research on increasing longevity is moving forward, and I just hope you guys step on it. So that's all I have to say at this point.
All right, thank you. So, you brought up some of the ethical issues, and there are quite a few ethical issues that um, are very relevant to a longevity discussion. Not so much whether we will get to immortality or not, but the ethics of both choosing to pursue immortality or a really long life, and also the ethics of who gets access to the technology and why, and of course how too. I mean, if you think of people like Brian Johnson, who is basically replacing his own blood with his son's blood, and replacing his, I think, also his father's blood with his own blood. So younger blood makes you younger, that sort of thing. You can easily see, as Daniel mentioned, with Putin, for instance, replacing his own blood with young Russians' blood, perhaps. So that doesn't seem like a good way forward, unless you want to go the very unlibertarian path of keeping people in stock just to feed off of them. But of course, starting with the non-aggression principle and everybody's equal rights, that shouldn't be the case. That shouldn't be a problem for us in that sense. But are there any ethical issues involved in just every individual's freedom, I suppose, to pursue a longer life and pursue perhaps living forever? Are there concerns that we should deal with from a libertarian perspective? What do you think? Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. Oh,
I'll
go
go,
ahead,
Mary.
Daniel. No, you go ahead, Daniel.
Well, I'm pretty sure we'll be in sync on this. That is, I would be strongly in favor of everyone's individual right to choose for their own body. I mean, I think that is pretty fundamental libertarian principle. Now we live in a country and in a world throughout, I think, most of the world where you don't have an unrestricted right to pursue your own health and your own longevity.
Mhm.
You have, in every country, we deal with the FDA and the CDC and so forth. And with the medical establishment, we should also point out that physicians and nurses and so on have certain, they're licensed, right? And their ability to keep their license depends on, them following certain rules. And so now the encouraging story here, news in the United States, I think, is, I wanted to mention this, is what's called right to try legislation, which has been emerging at the state level for a number of years. There are now right to try laws on the books in 17 states. But the very new news is that this is being introduced at the federal level by Senator Ron Johnson and 2 people in the House of Representatives. If you don't mind, I'm going to put this in the chat. This is just Ron Johnson's website. It's not the only guy involved in it, but this is June 8th. So literally we're here 5 days later, compared to the timing of this introduction. I think this has a pretty decent chance. Now, what does it mean? I haven't seen what's in the federal act. The state laws vary from, like, the most limited say that if you have a terminal diagnosis, you can go into one of these states with right to try legislation and you can pretty much try anything as long as you can get a physician to treat you and try it. Well, that's the most basic form of right to try. But in a number of states, I think New Hampshire's one, I think Montana is one for sure, there is a right to try 2.0 that's now on the books in these states that removes the requirement for a terminal diagnosis and replaces it with something like you have a condition that's just not treatable by any FDA-approved medicine or treatment. And now, if that's your condition, and then again, if you can find a physician in that state, you can go into that state and accept that treatment. Now, in a couple of those states, there's also a provision that allows, for the first time, as libertarians, we would expect this, but it's not generally available. It allows people to agree that I, the patient, will take the risk. Like, this may not work. In fact, this treatment may hurt me, but I'm willing to take the risk. And the physician, on the other hand, can enter into an agreement with them saying, yep, I'm going to do my very best here, but if it doesn't work, I'm not liable. Okay, I can't be sued by you or your relatives or something for the failure of the treatment. I think that's essential to enable freedom of choice. And exactly what will happen at the federal level, I'm not sure. And of course, there are a number of offshore, very viable treatment. As long as you have the resources to travel and pay for some offshore treatment, then there are alternatives outside the United States. But I'm encouraged by the situation in the United States, or the direction. I would encourage everybody listening to this live or later to write to your congressman right now about this federal legislation.
Yeah, and I'd like to comment on that, Daniel, because, having worked in the pharmaceutical industry, we had opportunities to do what's called a compassionate IND, which meant that if a patient agreed and the physician agreed that compounds, drugs, basically, that were not yet approved by the FDA could be given to them. But there are big problems with this. And this is part of the right to try legislation that I think Trump signed in his early days in office. And the thing is, when a company is just doing research to get the approval for the FDA, they are making the compound on a lab bench, basically. They don't have the manufacturing facilities. So oftentimes they don't really have the compound to give to people who want it. But there's even a bigger disincentive, and that is the FDA doesn't like that. And so companies that do compassionate use or right to try will be punished by the FDA. I know you're nodding your head, you know this. And by punishing, the punishing is subtle. They drag their feet on the next drug application. Maybe they disapprove it just because they don't like the company. And there's been a history of this. This isn't like some fear that's unfounded. This has happened. There was a CEO of Sarepta. I'm not sure I pronounced the name right, but he resigned because the FDA was so mad at him personally that they weren't going to approve anything his company put out. So he resigned. It didn't help. The FDA was still mad at the company, and still is. So I think there's a lot of disincentives, and this has driven, as you did mention, it has driven some of the research offshore. The best stem cell research has been moved offshore by Centeno, Dr. Centeno, and who took the FDA to court. Well, actually, the FDA took him to court, but because he was, for people like us who are elderly, he was growing up stem cells in his laboratory and then injecting them a week later when they were all grown up to elderly people, because the elderly people's stem cells were not enough to do the job. So the FDA said, if you manipulate them this way and grow them up in the test tube and put them in a week later, those are drugs. And they had to jump through the regulatory hoops, which just don't apply to stem cell research. It's ridiculous. And I know, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn. Liz Parrish did a study offshore with dementia patients showing that the Clotho gene could help these people. And she came back to the FDA and said, I want to do a bigger study, in the US. And they said, well, you got to do $8 million worth of animal work first, which is ridiculous after you've already shown it works in people. So anyhow, there's a lot of, unfortunately, the FDA is a big roadblock. And the only reason I'm familiar with it is because I had to work with them when I was in pharma, so it's a problem. But I still think, I still support Right to Try, because some companies will be able to decide that they're going to do this regardless, and that's going to really help a lot of people. So while I'm very aware of the roadblocks, I think pushing this shows the will of the people, and that's an important thing, because at some point in time, the hope is that we find a way to get around the FDA, change its mission, something that will take it out of the space where it is really interfering with innovation.
Thank you. Jeff, do you have any ethical concerns about longevity?
Yes, I do. Whether it's simply longevity or, seeking immortality, I guess my primary concern is access and more of a market economy. I think we need to accept the reality that people with resources are going to take advantage of and have access to advances in technology probably sooner than people without resources. The opposite, if we decide to go to a central planning model, then you have Putin and Xi Jinping getting access, or the politically connected getting access rather than the wealthy. So I think as libertarians, we should address that and talk about right to try legislation, changing the mission of the FDA. In other words, reducing regulation to bring access more quickly to everyone. I think that's defensible ethically. It does bother me that mainly people with resources are the ones who are going to get access to the technology first, but I'm afraid that might be one of the facts of life. Either that or politically connected people. And since I'm not politically connected, I'll go for the libertarian approach. So yeah, access is my primary ethical concern.
Do you think there's also an ethical issue in sort of the trade-off between focusing on research for longevity and maybe even immortality at some point versus the curing of disease and treating of disease? Because obviously the really sick are not going to benefit a whole lot from longevity research other than maybe as a side effect of it, finding cures as we research longevity, whereas the young and healthy might live forever instead. Is there an ethical concern specifically from a libertarian perspective in choosing longevity research over curing and treating diseases that kill off people or make their lives unbearable?
I have a strongly held view on this one. So if I may, I very much think that that longevity research, first of all, is likely to benefit everyone. That's point one. It is likely to benefit. It's got the greatest promise, I think, of like this idea that there's a tension or conflict between research on curing disease and research on longevity. I don't see that as any conflict at all. I see the research on longevity already yielding treatments for all kinds of diseases. So like I mean, there is this underlying is like the FDA has never accepted the idea that aging is a disease indication or that aging is a disease. And yet it is fatal 100% of the time, right? I mean, like, but I guess my point is you do see this. You see, I mean, I'll give you an example that we haven't mentioned here. Mitochondrial transplantation, which is, to my mind, is right up there alongside epigenetic age reversal in terms of its promise. So let me just take 60 seconds. A lot of people are unaware of this. Everybody knows what mitochondria are, I assume. Everybody knows that there's mitochondrial organelles inside individual cells that generate energy through the Krebs cycle. A lot of people don't know that mitochondria don't just sit there in cells. They move between cells all the time. They're like little batteries circulating around the body, and it is possible to transplant mitochondria into, for example, damaged heart tissue and see that heart tissue healed. It is stem cell treatments and mitochondrial transplantation are rather intimately connected in that a lot of the benefit from stem cell treatments will come from the mitochondria. But anyway, this has been pursued as a longevity treatment. But there are children, there's a class of rare diseases involving mitochondrial defects. Now, mitochondria, by the way, have their own DNA, mtDNA. And some children are born with slight defects in their mitochondrial DNA, and it is terrible. The consequences for these children are just terrible. They rarely live beyond like age 12, 15, something like that. But now we have, I mean, literally, they're trying to do this in clinics right now. This gives these children healthy mitochondria. A big challenge to scale it up because you have like 1 trillion cells in your body, and the typical cell can have anywhere from 100 to 1,000 mitochondria in it. So you're talking about very, very big numbers. But that's just one example. But I very strongly feel, first off, that longevity research supports curing of disease. And more than that, what longevity research is doing, and this is very important that it happen, it's shifting the emphasis of our whole healthcare system, which has been stuck on, oh, we'll just wait until you get diagnosed with some disease and then we'll try to treat it, to a whole paradigm around prevention, around anticipation, and like trying to stop that disease in its tracks at the incipient stage. Longevity research is in many ways behind that whole movement in healthcare, and I think that's an enormous positive. If I can hold forth for a moment longer here, on the issue of access, I would just make this comment that historically, the people with the most resources and the most willingness to take risks have been the ones to try treatments first, all kinds, and either for themselves or for people they cared about. And so we should be glad that there are people with resources who will try things first, and they may not be successful in a lot of cases. There are people who try things first. We learn from their successes and failures. There's an underlying question about, if we get a certain treatment, will the underlying economics of that treatment permit it to be mass produced, produced at scale at low cost? or not. There are some, one can conceive of some kind of treatments, and by the way, mitochondrial transformation might be a tough case. OSK might be, well, we'll see. I personally think that the cost of all of these things will come down inevitably through, as long as we got some free market economics at work. The only thing that would prevent this from happening is a socialist system. Prevent the dispersion and dissemination of the healthcare treatments for everyone. Yeah, that's basically because every human being has value to contribute and has something to trade for sure. And as the cost of these treatments comes down and down, we can all remember a time when, a device like this was only affordable by a handful of people, and now even young children have them. So that's my thought on that, Scott.
All right, Mary, do you want to chip in?
Well, I think Daniel pretty much said it all. All devices, all innovations come first to the people who can afford them, and that starts to drive the price down because you move closer to mass production. That's what's going to happen here. And I do know, by the way, but I think probably I may have been told it in confidence, so I'm not going to say, but I do know that there is already a lot of planning going into trying things that would drive the costs of these procedures down considerably. And it's probably not just happening in one place, it's happening all over because, of course, companies want to be able to sell their product. So they're, and of course, selling it to the masses is the biggest market. So that's what's going to happen in the long run, and probably not too long. So I think there's a lot of promise here.
Jeff?
Yes, I feel reassured by Daniel's comments about there's overlap between longevity research and curing diseases. In theory, well, I think it might be a bit of a false dichotomy. In theory, if you have a committee of bureaucrats that is assigned to give this amount of research dollars to longevity, give this amount, maybe there could be a conflict. But I think practically, no, I don't see an ethical issue. I think the market's big enough that there will be demand for treatment of very serious diseases and longevity. So no, I don't necessarily see that, especially after listening to Daniel, as a real problem.
Yeah, I think there might be this was sort of, you can consider the previous question as sort of a warm-up to this next one, which is also about a trade-off and potential problem, because I agree with the three of you that the trade-off between curing and living longer, they're both about health. So obviously there's going to be some overlap, and whatever we learn about optimizing and prevention is of course going to help also with treatment and curing disease. So maybe we should have started the other end. That's also a question to ask, right? But let's assume that longevity research takes us to a point where we all get to live 20, 25 years longer, or maybe even longer than that. And we get to extend especially our health span so much that we can plan on visiting all countries in the world and all the planets in the solar system, or what have you, all of these other plans. That would seem to possibly mean that people wait even longer to start a family and have children and things like that, because they want to explore, and they want to do that before they get tied down to taking care of children and that sort of thing. That has an impact on the population too. And especially if it is the case that we continue in a system where you can start saving early, and then you have great returns on your savings such that you can retire early. In this type of situation where the population is not renewed, and people will eventually die off for some reason, even if we can extend just natural life forever, then people will have accidents and what have you, right? So the population will shrink, people will die off at some point. If they then also postpone having children to when they might not be able to have children at all, or as many as they otherwise would, and they retire earlier than now, so fewer people are producing, then what are we actually looking at in terms of the future with a smaller and shrinking and aging population, with fewer and fewer people working and more people living off of what the economy itself can provide? And we're not talking here about a welfare system, right? We're talking about how a market system, voluntarily bottom up, with longevity, would create this type of problem. Or what do you see that this could be a problem, or is this not a problem? And if it is a problem, how do we solve it? Who wants to go first?
Volunteer. It's on
Okay,
you.
go for it.
So first of all, we do have to recognize the role of fertility in menopause. Like, extending health span is not the same thing as extending the fertile period for a woman in particular. And so I'm not following any research along those lines. So I think that the natural limits that have been there for a very long time, childbearing opportunity, are still there. Now you're kind of arguing that people might still choose, to like postpone. And then, of course, plenty of people have this experience, including myself. You postpone having children, then you try, then you find out it's not so easy, in your 30s or late 30s, and that sort of thing. So yes, that I think could happen. So we tackle that with reproductive assistance, research, and we can probably make some progress on that front. But I think again, I'm the optimist on this score. I think first of all, since part of my view is increasing health span by a modest amount, we're not talking about people living hundreds of years and the population not getting renewed. I mean, the other thing is it's kind of timely that we're holding this webinar the day after the SpaceX IPO, right? Because our population is not going to be limited to planet Earth. Okay. And we're going to, there's going to be a need, actually. I'd like to, I think humans will live on other planets in the solar system. We got some expansion potential here, for sure. Okay. And it's funny, that's always been kind of a science fiction notion. But today we're like one step closer to that science fiction becoming reality. Now, there's one other thing I would want to bring up in connection with what Per was saying about the market economy going. And this is very big in my traditional role in software. And that, of course, is AI. And I don't know how this is all going to play out. It's being right in the middle of it. Being in a situation where, like, my own employees, not to mention myself, are both like threatened in terms of like our expertise being replaced, and put a great advantage. Like my own work is being amplified every day, multiplied every day by using the AI tools, right? I read Peter Diamandis, his moonshots, and he's the super optimist, right? And he will talk about that we're on the cusp of a world where it's going, and I can't find anything wrong with this reason, that AI machines are going to be able to do so much work for us. And it's only one more step to robots, that robots with AI that carry out the physical work. We're going to be in a place where where the economics are the economics, even in the market economy, are going to be transformed. And I can't quite say, there's going to be wealth creation at an almost unimaginable scale. And frankly, there's going to be issues. And as libertarians, if you want to talk about and think about something exotic, start thinking about liberty for AIs. because if you're not doing that, if you're not like at least entertaining, like, oh, wait a minute, let's just think about this. There's too much behavior in these things that is too reminiscent of, of the conscious, self-aware agent, having agency, behavior that we have. So you've heard and read some of it. But if you want to be challenged, think about that one. And I actually think that the AI developments are coming so fast and so furious that they will overwhelm in time the concerns over longevity, the market, the market impact of longevity. So hopefully for the better, not guaranteed.
Well, I wanted to get back to something you said, Daniel, about the limits on women bearing children, because I think those are being challenged by this kind of research too. Lindsay Berkson, who's going to be coming to our November 7th event and is going to be writing an article for our journal, is probably close to the world's expert in bioidentical hormones, including, of course, the ones for women who actually can keep their childbearing years longer with proper treatment. I think I'm not sure what the record is, but I think it's the late 50s so far for a woman bearing a child. Not that I would be concerned about that personally if I were going to do that, because I'm thinking my body at 59 wasn't the same as it was in the 30s. I'd be rather bearing children a little earlier, but I think it's going to be possible. And if we actually are able to do partial age reversal, that means that my body might be like it is in the 30s when I'm using these other tools to keep my fertility. And also there's a whole area of 3D printing of organs, which is going on as well, which we didn't talk about, but I'm just going to mention because I think it's neat and the audience might like to hear about it. The most fascinating one for me was when they printed 3D ovaries for mice, took their real ovaries out, put the printed ones in, and those mice actually bore offspring. So, I think we are opening up a whole new field. It's not been talked about a whole lot, but I think there's some real possibilities there as well. So maybe we wouldn't have to worry about having children in our later years. That's not something men generally worry about at this point either. So I think it could be possible. And, so. And I don't know, Jeff might have something to say too about that, because I see you get closer to the mic, please.
Did you say get closer to my mic?
Oh no, I was saying I see you getting close to your mic.
Okay. Yeah, I have wondered if the expansion of I guess what you guys are calling health span would include reproductive ability. If not, then we as humans we face the same issues: longer life, fewer people working, fewer kids, and I think we would go to Japan to see how that's similar to what they're experiencing, or Europe. It seems to me in most developed countries, the replacement rate goes down when a country develops. So I thought if in fact we do have fewer kids, people living longer, less work, that immigration would be part of the equation, because in less developed countries, they've got plenty of people, and I would think immigration would be part of the answer. Robotics to help have someone take care of me, send me a nice robot. So I'm thinking that the market, I don't want to say the market will take care of it, but I'm thinking solutions would appear as we're able to increase our longevity, especially if it happens at a gradual pace.
Yeah, I'm not afraid of saying that the market will take care of it. I think that is that's a pretty good answer, actually. But it does require that we don't have a whole lot of regulations in the way. They're stopping entrepreneurs from figuring stuff out and providing
Exactly.
things of
Yeah.
value to people. And we do have quite a lot of regulations. So we need to find a way of getting rid of those. Part of the answer is, as I think Mary mentioned before, is institutional competition and having entrepreneurs find ways into other um, countries or other regions where the legislations are different. I know there are different kinds of trials in Prospera, the free city, for instance, where they're doing those things with minimal regulations, or they get to choose the regulations, I think, something like that. So there are these openings to possibilities, but it would be, of course, a whole lot better if the whole world was significantly deregulated so that entrepreneurs could pursue these things for us. We do have a couple of questions in the question and answers box, so I'm going to take them in order here. The first question is from an anonymous attendee, but asking, do you think a growing elderly population means more taxes on the young? So could longevity research and success in longevity research mean that taxation skyrockets?
Well, it would in the current system, but libertarians don't believe in the current system where we tax the young to support the old. I mean, I think one of the nice things about longevity is it seems you would have a longer working time if you wanted it, and you could save better for your own retirement, which I think is something young people today think about because they realize that the system can't support what's happening. There's too many older people and we've got fewer workers, and it's just not going to happen, and because it doesn't matter how they try to quote fix it. If they lower the taxes, then the elderly suffer. If they don't lower taxes, the young people suffer. I mean, taxation means suffering. It's theft. It's criminal, at least in the libertarian context. So what would be better is to have everyone save for their own retirement. I know Chile had a system where they did force the savings, which I'm not recommending. But what happened is they could put those savings to work in the private sector. So when they retired, they had plenty of money compared to those in the US. So we need to think about, getting out of this government system, which actually spends the money. It doesn't really save it and make it grow. And, have a free market system of retirement and savings. And I think longevity would help with that.
Yeah, so that brings us to a question by Elder in the question and answers box too, basically asking, with longevity research, how can governments keep the welfare system where you're basically taking from the young and giving to the old? If the old are getting more and more and they're staying old for a very long time, can the welfare systems actually survive? So, I mean, flipping the question basically, is it not a problem with taxation, but rather a problem with can they at all keep the welfare state afloat? What do you think?
I think not. I don't think they can keep the welfare state afloat. I like Mary's idea about we need to move toward more privatization, or at least some hybrid model. And I think most developed countries have done that. Not the United States, though. And actually, I have more concerns about the previous question was, are we going to be taxing young people to take care of old people? It seems to me the old people have most of the wealth, and the Bernie Sanders and the Elizabeth Warrens of the world are going to see this as, well, let's take that wealth and give it to the politicians who will give it to their friends and family and constituents. Um, so I have more concerns about the old people being taxed than I do. I know the current system is more of a Ponzi scheme where young people do have to pay and take care of old people. I don't think it can survive. No.
I think on like I'm sort of a macro investor, if you will, and pay a lot of attention to and I get services that from people more knowledgeable than I about global monetary trends, U.S. monetary policy, and all that stuff. And there is no way. I mean, I think most of America knows this now. There is no Social Security trust fund. There's nothing there. And in terms of our debt obligations, there's no way they will be met except through default. Default in one form or another, either default through monetization, in other words, monetary inflation, the more price inflation, or outright default, or some other, or just like reordering things in the world, some new, Bretton Woods and monetary accord. Now, the U.S. has its own issues, and they're very public to us as Americans. But most of us, many of us, are Americans. But the rest of the world has, in most cases, similar issues, and the U.S. is not in that bad of an overall economic position relative to the rest of the world. I'm certainly aware of that. But I could say that this issue of whether pension obligations will be fulfilled, whether the promises behind the U.S. dollar or the eurozone will be met. And in the long run, the answer is no, they won't. And investors are acting on that. They're betting on that. They're presuming that and just trying to do the best they can to cope with it. And a lot of investment decisions are made, on that basis. Like there's something to be said for real estate, as long as it doesn't get seized.
Yeah.
Right? There's something to be said for gold, even though it doesn't pay interest. It's one of the very recent news events is that for I think our entire lifetimes, everybody on this panel, at least since the end of World War II, the number one reserve asset of all the central banks in the world has been the U.S. dollar. Okay, now they also have other assets that has been replaced. The number one asset in central banks as a reserve asset is now gold, having just surpassed the U.S. dollar. Tells you something about the trend.
Yeah, indeed. So, ironically, this discussion on longevity has run out of time. So, thank you to the panelists, and I'll turn over to Mary for some closing remarks.
Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed this little discussion. And of course, we hope you'll join us in September if you want to learn more or ask more questions. And again, I want to remind you that to keep up with all the things that Liberty International is doing in longevity and really in other things, I hope that you'll sign up for our newsletter. I'll say it once more. You can go to liberty-intl.org/contact and scroll down to the bottom of the page to sign up. It's in your chat, so you don't need for me to remind you, but I thought I would. And of course, Per Bylund was talking about our conference in Nepal. As you know, one of the things we do every year is have a world conference. It's in Nepal in August, and we still have some openings. So please think about joining us there. It's going to be an adventure.